Welcome to the final video of part 12, and indeed of the whole course. Let's start with some genuinely good news, because after all the sober evidence, the big picture is encouraging. Financial inclusion is rising and fast. According to the World Bank's Global Fundex, 76% of adults worldwide now have some kind of account, up from just 51% in 2011. That's a remarkable transformation in barely a decade. A quarter of the entire adult population brought into the financial system in 10 years. In developing economies, 57% of adults now make digital payments. The mobile money revolution we just discussed, spreading at speed. And yet, our now familiar number returns to keep us humble. 1.4 billion adults remain unbanked. That's the remaining challenge. So hold both halves of this picture together. On one hand, extraordinary progress. Hundreds of millions of people gaining access to financial services for the first time, much of it driven by the mobile phone. On the other, well over a billion still left out, often the poorest and most remote. The glass is filling, genuinely, impressively, but it is far from full. Let me now give you the honest, balanced verdict on this whole field, because you deserve a clear conclusion after weighing all the evidence. 4 points. First, microfinance is a useful tool for financial inclusion, but not the poverty miracle it was once promised to be. We should neither dismiss it as the disappointed cynics do, nor oversell it as the early evangelists did. It helps, modestly. Second, savings, insurance, and payments often matter as much as, or more than, credit. This is perhaps the biggest lesson of the chapter. The world's obsession with lending was, to a real degree, misplaced. Third, digital finance is the most promising frontier, but it brings new consumer protection risks that we must take seriously. And fourth, the sentence that sums it all up. Access to finance is necessary but not sufficient to end poverty. Finance is a genuine tool for development. It can unlock investment, cushion shocks, and connect people. But it is not, on its own, a cure. Poverty has many roots: health, education, governance, infrastructure, and finance can only ever be one part of the answer. That's a mature, honest place to land. Hopeful about what finance can do, but clear-eyed about its limits. So where is financial inclusion heading? Let me offer 4 threads for the future. First, the field is shifting from a narrow focus on microcredit toward a much broader inclusion agenda, encompassing savings, insurance, payments, and even digital identity, which lets people prove who they are so they can access services at all. Second, technology is the great enabler. Fintech, mobile money, and digital ID are dramatically lowering costs and widening reach, doing at scale what human loan officers never could. Third, and this brings our whole course full circle, climate adaptation makes index insurance for small holders increasingly important. As the climate we studied in Part 7 and 10 grows more hostile, protecting the world's most vulnerable farmers against weather shocks becomes not a niche product, but an urgent necessity. And fourth, the guiding goal for the future, beautifully put, inclusion that builds resilience, not just access to debt. That phrase captures how far the field has matured. The early dream was simply to give the poor loans. The wiser, hard-won goal now is to give them genuine financial resilience. The savings, insurance, and tools to withstand shocks and build stable lives, rather than merely access to debt that might trap them. From access to resilience. That's the journey this field is on. Let me draw this final chapter together with 5 takeaways. 1. Microfinance serves the unbanked through group lending and other innovations that cleverly replace the collateral the poor don't have. 2. The rigorous RCT evidence, from Banerjee and Duflo to Miga's meta-analysis, shows modest effects, genuinely useful, but no poverty miracle. 3. Easy credit can actually harm through over-indebtedness, as in Andhra Pradesh, and through mission drift toward profit, as with Compartamos. 4. Microinsurance faces a demand puzzle and basis risk. An index design cuts costs but not basis risk. Yet cuts costs, but not basis risk. Yet insurance can powerfully unlock investment by removing the fear of ruin. And 5, mobile money, like M-Pesa, is the clearest success of all. A reminder that payments and savings may matter more for the poor than microcredit ever did. If you take one sentence from this chapter, let it be this: finance can genuinely help lift people from poverty, but only when we match the right tool to the real constraint and protect people from finance's darker side. This slide and the next collect the sources. And this is a truly world-class reading list in development finance, much of it by Nobel laureates. It includes Banerjee, Duflo, and colleagues on the miracle, or not, of microfinance, Meagher's meta-analyses, Carlin and co-authors on relaxing credit and risk constraints, Cole and colleagues on barriers to household risk management, Casaburi and Willis on the timing of insurance payments, Kai on insurance and household decisions, Suri and Jack on the long-run impact of mobile money, and Moduk's classic on the microfinance promise. If any part of this chapter moved you, these papers are where to go next. And the final slide gathers the data and further reading. The World Bank's Global Findex database, Ghatak and Ginane on the economics of joint liability lending, Cull and colleagues on microfinance meeting the market, the Big Push graduation study in science, the Microfinance Barometer, and on peer-to-peer lending, Valli and Zeng, Derur and colleagues, Tang and Hertzberg and co-authors. And with that, we reach the end, not just of part 12, but of the entire Sustainable Finance course. So let me close with a word about the whole journey. Over 12 chapters, we've traveled from the philosophy of responsible investing through banking, insurance, investments, and asset management, into carbon markets and financial stability, and finally down to the individual poor household. And if there's one thread that ties it all together, it's this: sustainable finance is at its best when it honestly confronts the gap between what the marketing promises and what the evidence delivers, and then works patiently and cleverly to close that gap. Whether it's a green bond, an ESG fund, a carbon price, or a tiny insurance policy for a farmer, the same discipline applies. Demand the evidence, respect the trade-offs, and never mistake a good story for a proven result. That critical, hopeful, evidence-based mindset is what I most want you to carry forward. Thank you for joining me through all 12 parts of this course. It has been a genuine pleasure to be your guide. I'm Gregor Weiss, and this has been Sustainable Finance. Take care, keep thinking critically, and see you in another lecture.